one brother offending another, the offender is to go and acknowledge his repentance for it unto his offended brother, who is then to forgive him. But if the offender neglect or refuse to do it, the brother offended is to go and convince and admonish him of it between themselves privately. It goes on to talk about what should happen if that doesn't work. And then it says, if he does testify his repentance with humble confession of his sin and judging of himself, giving glory unto God, the church is then to forgive him and comfort him and to restore him to the wonted brotherly communion which formerly he enjoyed with them. And these are the words of Alice Blair Wesley from 2000, from her lecture, The Lay and Liberal Doctrine of the Church, the Spirit and Promise of Our Covenant. We Unitarian Universalists, she says, are part of a very long story of many, many people who, in the middle of the complex situations they were born into, at some point fervently declared, the things in this story are not as they should be. There is a better way. And some of us are, by God, going to covenant to find out and live out simpler, saner, more natural, holier ways of love. We Unitarian Universalists derive from a long, tangled line of religious reformers. Maybe tangled is not the right word, but for sure the plot lines of our story of how Unitarian Universalist churches came to be as they are now are complex. We Unitarian Universalists are a liberal people over on the left of the free church tradition. The root idea of our entire tradition is the covenant. A covenanted free church is a body of individuals who have freely made a profoundly simple promise, a covenant. We pledge to walk together in the spirit of mutual love. The spirit of love is alone worthy of our religious loyalty. So we shall meet often to take counsel concerning the ways of love, and we will yield religious authority solely to our own understanding of what these ways are, as best we can figure them out or learn or remember them together. We come out of many singular rooms, wrote Unitarian Universalist minister Kenneth Patton, which we spoke earlier today. That is one of the reasons many of us call this tradition home, because it can welcome us as we are, where we are, and help us come together to build something new that can transform and heal us and, we hope, the world. It offers us a home in which to do our own naming. But that can be a challenging thing. What do we do when our namings don't quite agree with each other or are in outright conflict with each other? How do we work through and live through building a community that honors both our individual needs and visions and our collective understandings? How do we build a congregation that lives up to our commitments to both the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interdependent web of all existence, even this small corner of that web? Well, one of the ways is to set some expectations about how we will operate together as a group. And your leaders are already beginning this process, this work, exploring the creation of a healthy congregation process. And that's what I'd like to speak with you a little bit today. Now, my task today is not to tell you how to do this work or what the specifics of the pattern you may develop are. My task today, and I think throughout my time with you, is to help ground this work you're engaged in a worldview, in a theology that is true to our liberal religious tradition and is generative of the kind of community you are seeking to build. For example, one of the conversations you are going to be having over the next years is about your hopes and plans for longer-term professional ministry. To me, this is one of the things that a minister can bring to a congregation. It's what I'm hoping to bring to you in my time with you, a larger and deeper perspective to the work that you're doing. Showing my hand a little bit, one of the things that preaching is about for me is a practice of exploring the theological world and bringing it into conversation with the life of the congregation. Another task for me today, a smaller one though, is to offer you a little bit of reflection on the attitudes and stances that we as individuals can bring to our encounters with the group that may be powerfully transformative and which grow out of who we say we are. Because there's no way around it, it's hard work, what you're doing. Building a community and deciding how you want to be with each other as you do that building and rebuilding. It's not a once-and-for-all commitment, written, signed, and put away. It needs to be a living commitment, a covenant, which you each individually and collectively strive to inhabit and make alive each and every day. And the results can be beautiful and transformative for you and for the world, but it is hard work, and it will be hard work. One thing you'll know about me is I love that word, work. It's not a four-letter word for me, though. Well, it is, but it's not, you know. And when the going gets tough, the tough know the ground they stand on and what holds them in that work. They know why they're doing what they're doing and why it's important. This holds and challenges and enlivens the work and makes it glorious, even when it's painful. As Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "'Tis not in the high stars alone, nor in the cup of budding flowers, nor in the redbreast's mellow tone, nor in the bow that smiles in showers, but in the mud and scum of things. There, always, something sings." And so I want to ground the healthy congregation work in the roots of our tradition. I'd like to take us back to the 1640s, a long way back, and to a document created by our forebears in New England called the Cambridge Platform. Signed in 1648, this document laid out a new form of church polity. Now, polity is how a group of people governs itself. Specifically, in this case, a church or a group of churches. Some churches are governed by representative bodies, councils. This is what we call Presbyterian polity. Okay? Some churches are governed by a hierarchy of bishops. This is Episcopal polity. It's shared by the Catholic Church and the churches of the Anglican Communion, including the Episcopal Church in this country, and of course by the Church of England, now and also back in the early 17th century. It was in fact this church governance structure and objection to it, to being forced to adhere to it, that drove thousands of Christians, our Puritan ancestors, to depart England and settle here in North America. And the Cambridge Platform became their declaration of how and why they would govern themselves differently. The New Englanders went to great pains to assure the mother country and its church that they were not dissenting theologically. No, we're not heretics, they said, very specifically. Just they thought there was a better way for the church to be organized. And when they said better, they meant more holy. And as in based in the biblical stories of Abraham and his family and of the early Christian churches. Now, they weren't fooling around when they claimed a biblical basis for their structure. The Cambridge Platform, which runs to just 55 small pages in this modern edition, contains 308 biblical references. So they were serious in grounding their work in their understanding of what church meant to be. The platform describes a polity that has come to be known as congregationalism. And it is this form of governance that we claim to this day, as do the current mainline Christian Congregationalists, Unitarian Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, the Mennonites, the Quakers, our Jewish neighbors, and, surprisingly, interestingly, all varieties of Baptists. The Cambridge Platform lays out this form of church governance that consists of interdependent, autonomous congregations who choose their own lay leaders, choose and ordain their own ministers, decide how one becomes a member and how these members are taught and, as our first reading today shows, how they are admonished. It describes how individual congregations can and should be related to each other and to the secular world. I want to read you a little tiny bit more from 1648, remember. This is from the chapter titled, Of the Nature of the Catholic Church, meaning universal church, in general and in special of particular visible church. A congregational church is by the institution of Christ a part of the militant visible church, consisting of a company of saints by calling, united into one body by a holy covenant. Now, not words that we would use today here in this congregation, I don't think. But pay attention to what are the two most important phrases. Consisting of a company of saints by calling. Not all of those who live in the town or the country. You're not born into it, no. Those who have had for these people anyway, had a visible conversion experience. We might say, in our terms, who have identified themselves as being fit to be members. And united in one body by a holy covenant. Those who have agreed, who have covenanted to walk together. Now, we've moved along theologically. We've changed theologically since this time, but we still ground ourselves in that idea of covenant. It's not a contract. It's not a list of who gets what in what circumstances. It's not null and void if one party breaks one of its stipulations. Remember back to that first reading and the great lengths the designers of the Cambridge platform went to ensure that those who fell out of covenant could be brought back in. Here's another definition or description of covenant, also again by Alice Blair Wesley, who is a UU scholar of polity. Our covenant is simply, what a word, she says, our promise that we shall together seek truth and support one another as we dare, whatever the cost, to live by the truths we cannot help believing we have found at any particular time, and to support one another in doubt in those times when we can't find or we can't decide what the relevant truth is. The free church is held together by, insofar as we live by, she says, the spirit of this promise. These words come from Wesley's 2000-2001 men's lectures titled The Lay and Liberal Doctrine of the Church, the Spirit and Promise of Our Covenant. In these lectures, Wesley lays out her understanding of the creation of our tradition and her strong belief that we forget this part of our heritage at our peril, to our demise, in fact, she says. She sees that the heart of the free church, by which she means us, must be the spirit of love, and that this commitment to the spirit of love means we must struggle and reason together. She says, reasoning together about what we love and about all the social implications and complexities of love in continuous consultation has been a built-in part from the very beginning of the free church tradition from which we Unitarian Universalists have come. And we become members of the free church when and because we identify ourselves to be in sympathy with its aims, and we choose to commit to a covenant, to walking together. When you sign the membership book of a covenanted free church, she says, you are not signing a list of propositions, such as make up a creed. To join a free church is to sign a promise that may sound simple, it should sound simple, but which, if you keep covenant, brings you into intimate companionship with others who have promised to live with all the integrity you and they can together muster in all the years of your lives. A lifelong, forbearing engagement of heart, mind, and body. I will share with you that the temptation to just stand here and read Wesley's words to you is almost overwhelming. She just writes like an angel. I cannot recommend to you enough that you find and read these lectures, and I'll make sure you get information on where to find them. They really give a beautiful grounding of our tradition and a vision for the future of that tradition. And those are a lot of really powerful words, love and spirit and covenant. So let's just take a little breath together. And you may see all of this differently. You may have a different grounding for why you're here in this congregation, in this denomination, different than I do, or than Wesley does, or our forebears in Cambridge had. But knowing this history is crucial, I think. Knowing where we came from and why this way of gathering together as a religious community came down to us allows us to enter into our work in a context that gives us room for breathing, but also keeps us humble and accountable. Accountable to the tradition out of which our Unitarian and Universalist roots grew. And though we may reject most of the theology of our ancestors, we cannot reject the notion that how we shape ourselves into an organization must grow out of our shared worldview, our shared theology, our shared understanding of what we as human beings are and how we think we can best live and work together. That's the big picture. That's looking at things from the collective organizational perspective. Call it a seventh principle stance, looking at how the interdependent web of this congregation, of our congregation, is woven. I want to take a little time now to look at things from a more personal, individual point of view, more a first and second principle stance with an emphasis on the dignity part and the compassion part. It will all tie back together somehow, I promise. Though it has been a long time since I named myself a Christian, I find myself grounding my ethics in words that have followed me from my childhood church experiences. First the neighborhood church of my parents, and then in my time in the Anglican cathedral of my youth. Worship and learning in these places were steeped in biblical texts, as the Cambridge platform is. But one stuck with me, the words of the prophet Micah. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Holy One require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? These words keep coming back and back in my life, and they cover for me my relationship with the divine, behavior toward other individuals, and commitment to systems of society. But as I've grown older and wiser, well, more knowledgeable anyway, I've had to think about that passage a little more closely. Because that word kindness in the middle is not really what the Hebrew means. It's often also translated in English as mercy, but that too is too weak. Both kindness and mercy imply a one-way feeling, but the Hebrew word they translate, chesed, is richer and more connected than that. It's a really powerful word in Hebrew and in the Hebrew Bible, which has implications of loyalty and trust and duty and not just kindness, and which has taken a very deep meaning in the Jewish tradition. Kindness is not enough. This word, chesed, speaks of how we are in interaction with those with whom we cohabit, our neighbors and families and our larger communities. What stance do we take when we relate, when we converse, when we argue? But it is in all ways a word of relationship, of covenant. And it calls me to remember that by virtue of the fact that I am in a covenantal community, I have committed to participating in certain ways, to taking certain stances. In their book, Crucial Conversations, Kerry Patterson and his colleagues share their understanding of the ways that we stumble into crucial conversations, unknowing and with lack of awareness of how our skills and attitudes can make situations worse. The authors identify crucial conversations as those in which opinions vary, the stakes are high, and emotions are strong. And we never have conversations like that in our congregations, do we? In fact, so many of our conversations in churches and congregations are crucial: board meetings, stewardship drives, religious education planning, service planning, so many. And that doesn't even touch on theology or political involvement or anti-oppression work. We desperately need to pay attention to those conversations and our skills and our stances. In a real way, this is the arena of your healthy congregation work. Deciding how you are going to talk about difficult things. What Patterson and his colleagues' work boils down to is this. If we want these crucial conversations to go well, we have to enter into them with awareness of our needs and the needs of others, clarity about what our story is, effort at keeping the conversation safe for all, not shutting it down by withdrawal or by controlling, and commitment to establishing mutual purpose. Now, I'm giving this material very short shrift, and I apologize for that. It's not enough, but I wanted to point to it for you. There's much more deep wisdom in this book. I first encountered it in a class which focused on these skills in the context of anti-racist work, and I highly recommend it. There is more, but these themes stand out for me because they call us back to the covenant we make with each other in a religious community like this one. The commitments we make to walk with each other on this path, not to retreat or attack, but to walk together, and the commitment we make to hear and to be present to each other and make amends when we screw up, to rebuild covenant, and we will need to do that, to put our heart in a holy place. One last quote from Alice Blair Wesley. The Free Church is an organization we establish and join so that we may help each other to find over and over again in 1,000 varying frames and settings what our own worthiest loves are, and therefore what these loves now require of us, if we would be loyal, chesed, in the most meaningful sense, in what we do, in our actions, in the way we live. The basic enterprise of the Free Church, she says, is too personally important ever to turn over to any but faithful, there's that chesed again, long-term partners in the business of living with religious integrity, the living out of our real and right loves. May the work that you do together, even in the muck and the mud, be grounded in our commitment to walk together in the spirit of love. May we honor and learn from our history and the commitments of the ancestors of our traditions as we strive to build a world worthy of their dreams, worthy of our vision, and worthy of our children. May it be so for the flourishing of life and the triumph of love. And now we're going to sing again, which is a wonderful thing. We're going to sing number 1008.